Just some background. There were 7 youth, 5 adults. We went down to Hindman, Kentucky. That's the county seat of Knott County. And it's got 700 people in it, which is kind of small for a county seat, but that's the county that is there. And a year ago, they had some horrible rains that caused some massive flooding in that area of Kentucky. And that county alone had 26 people killed. And they're not a wealthy county, and the folks that remained there and had their homes damaged are still struggling to get them repaired and replaced. And so that's where we went. And before I hand this over to anyone else, I'm just going to read, sorry about that, a thank you note that came from the church down there. We stayed at Hindman Methodist Church. This was coordinated through Blanche Taylor, a member of that church, and this is the thank you note that she wrote. It's written to Dear JUMC Youth, but this was really meant for all of you. It was all of you who supported us. It was all of you who prayed for us. It's you that helped us get us there. So, Dear JUMC, on behalf of the Hindman Methodist Church and our community, I want to thank you so much for coming to Knott County to help families recover from the flood. Thank you for giving up some of your summer vacation time to help others. You are indeed being the hands and feet of Christ. I also want to thank you for the contribution that you made. We appreciate it very much. We began flood relief immediately after the flood, and because of the generosity of so many individuals, churches, and other organizations, and people like you, we continue to be able to help families to repair and rebuild their lives and their homes. There is much more to be done, and we are committed to this ministry as long as the need exists. And indeed, great needs still exist for many families in our communities, and we ask that you hold them up in your prayers. Sincerely, Blanche, Hindman Methodist Church. And we didn't really rehearse this, but we'll just give the mic around to anyone who has any stories to tell, anything that you want to share.
We got there Sunday afternoon, late afternoon, and talked to Blanche and her husband McCoy, and she was telling us the background and things. And she had a list of 4 different properties that we could work on if we felt we could get done. So we went to one of the houses on the list, and you'll see in the video there were 4 huge poles that went up as high as her roof did, and then 3 smaller poles put in by 2 different sets of people. Plus she had a big cement steps going up to her trailer about this high. Those things were heavy. We're thinking, well, I guess the one vehicle we had a trailer hitch. We could try to yank it out of the way because it was in the way. Well, we had talked to the lady that lived there, and she ended up having her nephew pull it out. So we got there Monday morning. They were at the end of the trailer, sitting about 10 feet away from the trailer. So that was good. But the next house we went to, the lady needed siding put up from the ground up to about this high, because that's how high the water got into her house. And all that siding had to be ripped off from here down. And she had a couple other things, some brick mold to put around the door and some trim to put in a bedroom that they had to redo because of the flooding. Well, none of the materials were there. So it's like, well, if we don't have materials, we can't work at that house. So we decided to go to the first house we went to and build them a nice porch, nice deck with some steps. Nobody else?
Yeah, it was a really fun trip, and I wanted to thank the adults for putting up with us, and I wanted to thank you guys for giving and supporting us through giving.
And just the one story that I had really wasn't about the trip itself, well, partially, but there's a verse in Romans 8 that I always like that says, in all things God will work for the good of those who love him. And I found out that he works even through procrastination. I had delayed trying to make arrangements for our vans, and typically when we go on long trips, we like to get some 15-passenger vans, big long things, to transport tools and people. Well, I had put that off, and so finally it was time to get them, and all I could get were some minivans. I was going to get 3 minivans. They only had 2, but they gave us an SUV, which is a pretty good fill-in for a minivan, still seated enough people. But one of the minivans had those stowaway seats. So that became our tool van. So Mike was able to put in tarps, put in corrugated, made it our tool van. So that was number one result. The other thing was when we got down there and we started working on these properties, the land is not very suitable for homes because everything's on a hill. So they tend to follow ravines, and the roads follow the ravines, and the roads are 1 lane wide. And to get to the house with the deck, not only was it very narrow next to a creek, but that creek was undercutting it in spots, and the road was falling away. And every day it seemed like the road was getting a little smaller. Might have been my imagination or fear, but that's what it looked like to me. And so we were very thankful that we did not have these big, long 15-passenger vans to try to maneuver through there. We had these minivans. So 2 blessings that were unexpected. Thank you, God, for that.
So you see at the beginning, I think, the deck we made first. We got there and we had to figure out what to do with all these posts. It's like, well, is these shorter posts meant to be to put a carrying beam on to span the length, but if there was one missing. So we decided to just use the smaller posts, and you'll probably see that there, and left the bigger posts so that because she wanted a roof on it too, but we had no ladders, so we knew we couldn't put the roof on. So we left the bigger post for the next crew to come in to try and put a roof on. And it turned out good because then the steps will be covered with the roof and everything else. But then we had the band joist around by lunchtime on Monday after figuring out what to do and how big to make it and all the things that have to go with figuring out, because there was no plans. We got down there, just a pile of lumber, so we're sorting through the lumber, seeing, okay, what's going to go where, what can we do, how big of this one could we build? Because when we were in West Virginia, there was a guy that was in charge. He knew exactly how big the deck was we needed to make at this site, how big the deck needed to be at this site, what we had to do at this site. There was nobody down there but Blanche and her husband. There was a lady we could call to get materials if we needed it. But we actually made several trips to Lowe's, which was about 30 minutes away, and loaded the vans up with some materials and stuff. But then by Tuesday at lunchtime, we were finished with the deck and the steps and the railing and everything that goes with that. So Kevin and I took a drive out to one of the other sites on our list. It was about 15, 20 minutes away. Started out, the road the guy lived on was a nice 2-lane road with a center line. Then it turned into a 2-lane road with no center line. Then it turned into a lane about a lane and a half wide. Then it turned into a 1-lane road, and then it got a little narrower even than that. So I'm going, I hope nobody's coming the other direction, because there's no place to pull over. The first place we were at had some pull-offs that you can pull over, draw lots of driveways. This had nothing. But of course, our GPSs every time on our phones, this guy's address is like 4827. It said said you have arrived. I turned over and looked at the mailbox, and it was 422. That doesn't look like the right address, so we just kept going. Finally, we found it, and you can see it's a trailer that sits about this high off the ground. There's steps going up to it, so we'd have to build a deck up pretty high, and again, we had no ladders, which would have made it easier, but there was absolutely no materials there either. No posts put in, so it's like, I told the guy, he says, you were the first people that's come here to look to see about a deck for me. And steps. And he'd had 2 strokes and a heart attack. He says, the steps that are on the front of my trailer they don't work. So I can't promise you anything because there's no materials. I said, the first thing we have to do is get materials. He said, well, they told me 6 different times that the materials were on their way and they've never showed up. But I think it's the road and because his driveway went down, it's about, 30, 40 feet before you got the trailer, but it was down a little hill you had to walk down. So it's like,
Steep,
I think, yeah, very steep. I think the driver said, we ain't dropping that stuff off because there's no way to get it down there. But eventually, during the week, the materials did get there, but we started working on this other lady's house. Had to put gutters and downspouts and take the underpinning off. And she had a pedestal sink that a previous crew came in and didn't attach to the wall. The only thing that was holding it was the plumbing. So we had to go find some brackets and they had to actually they had a nice garage at the Hindman Church there, and they had a workbench with a vise on it, and had to take some metal and bend it and pound it, and finally was able to drill it in. And John was basically standing on his head because the hot water heater was right beside the pedestal sink, so he's kind of down in there standing on his head because I couldn't get in there. And I got the right side okay, but he attached the left side, and at the end, and her shower head, I don't know who put that in for her, but you could move it like this. So I'd fashioned some, one of our trips to Lowe's, I got some screws and put it down in there so it didn't move quite as bad. And then Don Richards had to caulk around the tub, the shower, because it was leaking. And of course, during the course of moving some stuff around inside the house, everything she had that she salvaged was inside this little log cabin type thing. And Don accidentally raised the ladder up a little too high and hit her ceiling fan and broke that, so he went and bought her a new ceiling fan and installed that.
Just one more thing that I hope you see in the presentation is whenever we needed anything done underneath the steps, that was Carly. She always volunteered for that, so hopefully you'll see a picture of her underneath the steps doing work down there.
All right, so just a little bit more context to the homes that we were working on. The first home was for a lady named Pam. Her original home had been destroyed by the flood, I believe. So the home that we were working on was just the home that she had ended up in afterwards. The second lady, her name was Tammy, very, very talkative. She was actually in this little cabin when the flood hit, and it had actually knocked it off of the pedestals that the cabin was on. And then she had a separate trailer as well that got destroyed. So very kind of a scary situation for her to be in. Also, the first night that we were down there, Carl, Mike, and I went out to a couple of the potential job sites just to kind of scope them out. And again, going back to what Mike said, the GPSs just don't work. You end up like a quarter mile down the road from where you actually need to be, and then it's the middle of the night and you're asking random strangers where you should be going. Luckily, that area of the country, everyone knows everyone, so they're able to point us in the right direction. But at one point, we had to make Carl back down a road 100 feet because we couldn't turn around. Yeah, that's just kind of area that it was, kind of rural, kind of out there, and very tight, curvy roads. But overall, it was a great time.
And when he had to back up, that was a road that had about 6 inches on this side of the tire and 6 inches on this side of the tire, and one side was a creek. So and the other side was the mountain. So you couldn't make many mistakes backing up. And he was driving the big SUV, so it was kind of tricky. We actually got out of the van and said, "Okay, come on." Can you see?
Last call. Anyone else? I think we're good then. Thanks, everybody. Watch the presentation, and then we hope to see you all out at the pavilion for lunch. Thank you.